When I was a teenager, I had a friend who introduced me to the online world of pickup artists. And as somebody who wanted a girlfriend, I was really intrigued. I was like, okay, so I just follow these guys' advice, I do what they say, and I'm going to get to meet women and learn how to talk to them and make them my girlfriend. That sounds great. But I was really skeptical that it was actually going to work. Some of the stuff I was reading, it sounded totally outlandish. So I wanted proof. And so I wanted to do a little bit of an experiment. I went out to my local video rental store, back when video rental stores were still a thing. That makes me feel old. And I walked up to the girl behind the counter and I asked her if she had a certain movie in stock. This girl was really pretty and this was my first time trying anything like this, so I was pretty nervous. Now, after she answered my question, I decided to employ one of the tactics that I had learned about from these pickup artist guys. I smiled and I said to her, "Did you know that your nose wiggles when you talk?" And her response was absolutely amazing. She puts her hands over her nose and she's laughing really loudly. She's saying, "Oh my gosh, does it? That's so embarrassing." I really couldn't believe it. I was absolutely gobsmacked. I couldn't believe this huge reaction that I was able to generate from her, from this simple line that I had memorized, from the internet. Of course, it was a complete lie. It wasn't true at all. Her nose didn't wiggle, but I'd read that this was designed to make women feel slightly insecure about her appearance. Not enough to actually be construed as like an insult or you critiquing her in some way, but just enough to make her self-conscious and to sort of shake her out of her stupor and take notice of you, like, wow, who's this guy? You don't say it in a mean way. You say it with a smile, like, oh, look at that. Isn't that cute? Anyway, after she finishes laughing, she just stands there and smiles at me expectantly, like, okay, what's next? And I had no idea what to do. I completely froze, which is a real missed opportunity because her body language was just an open invitation to keep flirting with her. She was hugely receptive because I was probably the first guy that stood out to her in a long time, someone who was actually bold enough to comment on her appearance, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go next. I was really new to this and I only just started learning about it. This was like my first experiment, so I didn't know what to do next. So I think I just mumbled something and just sort of walked off. I didn't want to push it. I didn't want to risk what I had already accomplished. In my mind, I'd spoken to this really pretty girl who I would have been nervous to approach in the first place. I'd gotten this hugely positive reaction from her and I was like, yes, that's a success in my mind. I wanted to go out on top. So that's the story of the first time I ever tried a pickup line on a woman. Actually makes me quite nostalgic to think about. To be young again. But the reason that I tell this story is to segue into the topic of today's video, which is about lying to women in the form of rehearsed lines, memorizing certain things to say to women when you approach them, and why personally I'm a really big fan and I actually recommend all men learn how to do this. Now let me give you a very quick history lesson about picking up women, because in the old days, back when I was learning about it, the techniques that were being taught was all about rehearsed lines. Say this to her, then say that to her, then ask this question, then play this game. The whole thing was kind of like a telemarketing script where no matter what she says, the next thing to say. You just keep running through that script in a way that you're controlling the frame and appearing confident, but it's all pre-rehearsed. That was the big thing when it came to picking up women for quite a long time. Eventually, it did fade away in popularity as people started to discover natural game and being natural. Then it became less about specific lines and techniques and more about just getting into a really confident, organic flowing state where you're just naturally, flirtatious and attractive. And that's when the pickup artist sort of community started to look a lot more like just the self-help community. Now, I actually think that that's a positive evolution. The self-development, self-improvement community is a lot healthier, less toxic than, the old school pickup artists used to be. And while I think that the telemarketer method of picking up women was pretty cringeworthy and kind of pointless in the sense that there's no real, lesson to be learned in learning 100 different pickup lines. If fundamentally you're a really unattractive guy leading a really boring life, then obviously self-improvement, becoming an interesting person is going to be, the way to go. But I do fear that in that transition, we may have thrown out the baby with the bathwater. There's almost a stigma now attached to using rehearsed lines as men in particular who want to be like virtuous and upstanding moral people. They don't like the idea of lying to women. And I think that's just viewing this too simplistically. I'm going to advocate for the opposite. So please hear me out when I say that I think that every guy who does cold approach women, goes out to clubs, goes to the street to practice their game, even just meeting women through their social circle at parties, I think that it is essential for guys to learn some rehearsed lines and to practice that. And that's why I'm going to advocate for it in this video. So you might be wondering, Alexander, I don't understand why you'd support this. Isn't this lying? Isn't this being inauthentic? Well, think of it like this. If you were asked to be the keynote speaker at some big important conference, like you had to give this really important speech, wouldn't you prepare for it? Wouldn't you make some notes? Or would you have in your mind like, no, I'll just figure out what to say when I'm up there at the podium. I'll just wing it because authenticity and being natural is so important to me. I see nothing wrong with a little bit of preparation because public speaking is terrifying. But you know what else is really terrifying? Walking up to a pretty woman who you don't know and just starting a conversation with her. In that moment, you are scared out of your brain. Like there's so much pressure. She's looking at you expectantly and the amount of pressure is just enormous. Don't you want to make that a little bit easier on yourself? The chances of you in that moment, in that high pressure situation, totally spontaneously knowing the perfect thing to say and delivering it impeccably in such a way that you come across as someone who's confident and attractive and you generate attraction and desire from her, the chances of that are so minute. Take the pressure off yourself. Make it a little bit easier. If you have a line that is memorized that you know is clever and confident and it always garners a positive reaction from women when you say it to them, why wouldn't you use that? Now you might object, Alexander, isn't this being completely unfair to women? You're presenting yourself as confident and charming, but it's all just an act. I'll address that in a moment, but please do not think for a second that you're doing women any favors by approaching them and being authentically awkward, standing in front of them and not knowing what to say. Women absolutely hate that. It creeps them out. Some socially clueless guy mumbling to her, not knowing what to say, occupying her attention when she might not want it, that's a horrible position to put a woman in. It is far kinder to her to come across with confidence, make her smile, make her laugh, give her a pleasant interaction from a high value guy who knows how to make a woman feel good. So yes, while it might technically be lying or being dishonest or acting or being fraudulent or whatever you want to call it, please don't be too much of a purist because I'm not talking about lying to her forever. I'm talking about using rehearsed lines just enough in order to smooth over those socially awkward situations in order for you to gain confidence, to gain some flow, to get into your groove, to get into your vibe so that your natural self can then take over. When you're first interacting with a woman, it might take a couple of minutes of conversation before you can both actually relax and just let the topics flow naturally. You have to calibrate to each other's vibe. You have to get over that initial nervousness and awkwardness. That just takes time. But in service of getting to that point, if you want to say some rehearsed lines and ask her some questions that you've already memorized, not because you particularly want to know the answer, but because you know that it's going to stimulate an interesting and fun conversation, I really see no issue with that at all. In fact, I recommend it. If you do this, if you memorize a bunch of lines, you may be surprised at how little you need to use them. It's just a matter of knowing in the back of your mind that you have something to fall back on. Anytime the conversation starts to falter or you lose a little bit of confidence, knowing that you have some pre-prepared, material that you can bust out, that's going to give you the confidence to just plow on naturally, knowing you have that fallback position. Because even if you start the interaction well, what often happens when a man approaches a woman is that there reaches a point in the conversation where he stalls. Like he freezes and he doesn't know what to say next. His nerves just completely overcome him. In that moment, he'll do one of three things. Either he'll say something stupid out of desperation to just say something, but that stupid thing that he said completely blows the chances that he had with her. In his desperation to end the interaction and to escape the awkwardness, he can prematurely ask for her number and inevitably get rejected because he hasn't talked to her for long enough. He hasn't built it up enough rapport in order to seal the deal yet. Or perhaps the most cringeworthy thing of all is the panic just completely overwhelms him, and so he just, leaves the conversation. All because when his nerves overtook him and he didn't know what to say, he didn't have a fallback position. Now, in that situation, wouldn't it have been helpful for him to have just something in the back of his mind, something that he could have pulled out, something that would have, generated some more conversation, something witty and interesting that he could have used when it was necessary? Some funny story, some interesting question, some flirtatious game that he could play with her. If you need ideas on the sort of material that I'm talking about, I recommend spending some time online looking at genuine pickup artists for instruction and inspiration. That's really not my specialty. Like sometimes on Hey Hero, people will reach out to me wanting specific advice on pickup and game. And while I know my basics and I was really into it, back when I was a lot younger, I never got like crazy invested in the whole pickup scene. So there are people better suited to me to actually give you instruction on that kind of thing. If you reach out to me on Hey Hero, it's better to be more about like overall advice. Like tell me your story, tell me about your relationship, this girl you like, and I can send you a personalized video in response. But there are guys out there who have seemingly dedicated their entire life to the first 5 minutes of an interaction with a woman. Would bore me to tears, but some guys just find that initial flirtation really, really fascinating. And you want to look at those guys to learn the basics. I don't really have any recommendations, but hopefully in the comments section, if some of you guys really feel positively about a particular like dating coach who you think could be helpful, please let people know. Let's let this community help each other out. Recommend good people. Now, I imagine there are some people who have never tried this before and are hearing me talk about canned lines, rehearsed openers and things like that, and think that I'm being ridiculous or really old-fashioned or something. But all I ask is please don't dismiss this as pointless until you have at least tried it, because you may be surprised how much your confidence goes up by simply employing this very basic and easy to implement tactic. And of course, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. You know how stand-up comics practice their routine over and over again? They say the same jokes to different crowds and they're always perfecting the exact timing or the exact wording. That's kind of what this is like. The more you do it, the more you practice this with women, the more you'll learn which lines work best, which games are most effective at generating a positive response. In what circumstances is it appropriate to pull out this line or this game or this question? If you do it enough, you'll even learn the typical responses that you'll get from women every time you ask a question or tell a story, and you'll know the best response to give to their responses. It's kind of like in chess, if you always open your pieces in the exact same sequence, eventually you'll learn all the possible responses to your opening and you'll know the best responses to that. It's this similar thing. So I highly recommend learning some lines, learning some games, learning some questions, memorizing some funny stories, and making this extremely difficult task of approaching women and talking to them a little bit easier on yourself. From my perspective, this isn't about being deceptive or being dishonest. This is just about socially lubricating those really awkward moments in an initial interaction until you find your confidence, until you get into your groove, and that's when your natural self can just take over. When you're looking for a woman to date, what is better? Being completely open-minded and judging each individual on their own basis, or having very strict ideas about the kind of woman that you want to attract, really high standards and a very narrow idea about what you're looking for? Are these two approaches mutually exclusive, or can they learn from each other? This is the topic of my latest Patreon video. If you want to see that, then please go and sign up for my Patreon. It's just a $5 a month subscription. You get instant access to a whole bunch of exclusive content. It's a wonderful way to support the creator. I'd love to have you be a part of it.